Ancient Egypt, a civilization spanning more than 3 millennia along the Nile, is notable for its organization, monumental architecture, and a profound belief in eternity. Its history is a tapestry of pharaonic power and constructive feats. The Egyptian legacy is based on stone, gold, and crucially the concept of cosmic order that governed their society. Like, subscribe, and share. Let's begin. To understand Egyptian history, it is essential to understand geography. Egypt was and still is a gift of the Nile. The river was not just a source of water, but the central axis of Egyptian life, transport, and worldview. Its annual flooding cycle, the inundation, which fertilized the surrounding lands with black silt, was the engine of their agriculture and the basis of their wealth. The Egyptians divided the year into 3 seasons: Akhet, flood; Pere, sowing; and Shemu, harvest. This cyclical pattern of death and rebirth not only dictated their agricultural life, but permeated their religion, symbolizing the eternal promise of resurrection embodied by the god Osiris. Dependence on the Nile fostered the need for a centralized administration capable of managing irrigation systems, a key factor in the early unification of the country. Without the Nile, ancient Egypt as we know it would not have existed. Before the rise of the great pharaohs, Egypt was a land of agricultural cultures scattered along the Nile. The pre-dynastic period, from 5500 to 3100 before Christ, saw the slow development of Neolithic communities that eventually coalesced into 2 main kingdoms: Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north, the Delta. Cultures such as the Badarian and Naqada laid the foundations of Egyptian society, developing irrigation techniques, advanced pottery, and funerary practices that reflected a growing concern for the afterlife. The Naqada culture, which encompasses from around the year 4000 before Christ, showed a significant evolution, with important sites such as Hierakonpolis and Abydos, which became centers of power. It was during the Naqada III phase, often called Dynasty 0, that the use of hieroglyphic writing began to take shape, initially for administrative and labeling purposes. The development of the ceremonial slate palette, used for grinding cosmetics, became a means of recording political feats. The Nama palette, dated to this period, is often considered the key document that records the unification, showing the pharaoh wearing the white crown of the south and the red crown of the north, symbolizing control over the 2 lands. The symbols of royalty and monarchical ideology, pillars of future civilization, were consolidated during this period. Knowledge of copper metallurgy also took hold, gradually replacing stone tools. The turning point in Egyptian history is the unification of the country, an event traditionally attributed to Pharaoh Menes, possibly Nama, around the year 3010 before Christ. Marking the beginning of the Archaic or early dynastic period, from 3010 before Christ to 2686 before Christ. The union of the 2 lands under a single crown was more than a simple political act. It established the central concept of the pharaonic monarchy as mediator between gods and men, guarantor of Mayat, cosmic order and justice. The capital was established in Memphis, a city strategically located at the meeting point of Upper and Lower Egypt, whose name is derived from the Egyptian term Ineb Hedge, white walls. The pharaohs of the 1st and 2nd dynasties consolidated control, and although the funerary buildings of this period, the mastabas, rectangular mud brick tombs, already displayed an architectural sophistication that foreshadowed the wonders to come. With the funerary complex of Jet in Abydos being a key example, it is in this period that the ideology of the pharaoh as the incarnation of the god Horus solidifies, and royal names, such as the name of Horus, are inscribed within a serek, a design that imitates the facade of a palace, asserting his divine authority. The development of centralized administration with a vizier at its head was crucial, allowing the mobilization of resources and manpower on an unprecedented scale, setting the stage for the Grand Age of the Pyramids. The Old Kingdom, 3rd to 6th dynasties, is the golden age of Egyptian history, a period of internal peace, economic prosperity, and the culmination of pharaonic authority. It is universally known as the Age of the Pyramid Builders. This period was notable not only for its architectural feats, but also for the establishment of an efficient bureaucracy and the consolidation of state theology. The 3rd dynasty marked a radical break with the past. Pharaoh Djeser and his brilliant vizier and architect Imhotep, who was later deified as the god of medicine and architecture, revolutionized architecture by building the step pyramid of Saqqara. This pyramid, the first known monumental stone structure in the world, was a series of superimposed mastabas, symbolizing a stairway to heaven for the soul of the pharaoh. The Saqqara complex was the first structure built entirely of stone, and its design, with walls, courtyards, and temples, set the model for all subsequent funerary complexes. The Fourth Dynasty saw the peak of this constructive fervor and the centralization of power. The pharaohs Sneferu, Khufu, Cheops, Khafre, Khephren, and Menkaure, Mycerinus, conceived and executed the most iconic pyramids, those of the Giza Plateau. Sneferu, Khufu's father, was a tireless builder. He perfected the pyramidal shape by building the pyramids of Meidum, the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid in Dashur. The Red Pyramid is the first true pyramid, with smooth faces and the design that would become the standard. Khufu was responsible for the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest ever built and one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Its construction required a massive logistical and engineering organization, demonstrating the absolute power of the pharaoh and the state's ability to mobilize resources. These structures, a testament to the absolute power of the pharaohs and the advanced organization of the state, were not just tombs but massive funerary complexes that included valley temples, causeways, mortuary temples, and satellite pyramids. The pharaoh, as a living god and son of the sun god Ra, needed to ensure his passage to the afterlife to guarantee the life cycle of Egypt, since his posthumous well-being was synonymous with the well-being of the state. The Great Sphinx of Giza, probably built for Khafre with the body of a lion and a human head, represents the strength and wisdom of the pharaoh. However, the absolute power of the monarchy began to slowly erode during the 5th and 6th dynasties. The growing cult of the sun god Ra, centered in Heliopolis, and the increasing influence of Ra's priests, challenged the total deification of the pharaoh. The pyramid texts, inscriptions found in the tombs of the last pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, beginning with Unas, focused more on the pharaoh's role in the sky alongside Ra, rather than his earthly power. Decentralization was another key factor. The pharaoh began to reward nobles and high officials with lands and hereditary titles, especially the nomarchs, provincial governors. This gradually weakened central control. The long reign of Peep II, 6th dynasty, which lasted for about 94 years, the longest in history, was followed by a collapse. When Peep II died, the absence of a strong successor and the growing autonomy of the nomarchs led to the First Intermediate Period. The First Intermediate Period, 7th to 11th dynasties, was a time of anarchy and social disorder, often described in Egyptian texts as a time of chaos where Maat was replaced by Isfet, disorder. Central power in Memphis faded, the country fragmented into a series of almost independent nomes, provinces, which often fought each other. Famine and climate instability, possibly due to low Nile levels that resulted in poor harvests, plagued the land. The document known as the Warnings of Ipuwer vividly describes the chaos. The rich became poorer, the poor rose up, and the pharaoh's tomb was desecrated. Despite the political chaos, this was a time of great literary development and social change. The crisis of pharaonic power led to a profound theological change. The concept of life after death was democratized. Previously, only the pharaoh, as a god, was guaranteed passage to the afterlife. Now, the funerary rite, previously reserved exclusively for the pharaoh, began to be available to ordinary individuals, as evidenced by the proliferation of the coffin texts, which adapted and expanded the pyramid text to the needs of the individual citizen. This change meant that individual well-being no longer depended solely on the posthumous well-being of the pharaoh. Two centers of power gradually emerged: Heracleopolis, 9th and 10th dynasties in Lower Egypt, and Thebes, 11th dynasty, in Upper Egypt. The struggles between these two rival kingdoms defined much of this period, with the Theban princes eventually emerging as the dominant power. Mentuhotep II of the 11th dynasty, ruling from Thebes, achieved the reunification of Egypt around 2055 before Christ after defeating the Heracleopolitans, marking the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. This event was celebrated as a restoration of Maat after the Isfet. This era is seen as a classical period of Egyptian culture and literature, a time of introspection and intellectual maturity. The pharaohs focused on restoring Maat, securing the border, and projecting an image of wise and protective sovereigns. The capital was moved to Itjawi, near El Fayum, under Amenemhat I, the founder of the 12th dynasty, a more central location to control the entire country, although Thebes retained its religious importance. The 12th dynasty in particular was the pinnacle of the Middle Kingdom. Pharaohs such as Sesostris III and Amenemhat III carried out vast development projects. Sesostris III is remembered as a warrior king who consolidated the annexation of Nubia, securing access to its gold mines. He ordered the construction of a series of imposing fortresses along the southern border, including Buhen, Amenemhat III focused on the El Fayum region, drastically improving irrigation and land reclamation, which significantly increased agricultural productivity. The labyrinth or mortuary temple of Amenemhat III in Hawara was so vast that it was admired by later Greek writers. The pharaoh's character changed noticeably. Unlike the distant pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, the rulers of the Middle Kingdom depicted themselves as shepherds of their people, concerned with justice and welfare, often with a somber realism in their sculptures that reflected the weight of responsibility. This concept was reflected in literary works of the time, such as the story of Sinuhe, a masterpiece of world literature, and the teachings of Amenemhat, which showed a more pragmatic and sometimes cynical view of royalty. The art and sculpture of this period achieved an emotional sophistication and realism that were rarely equaled, with portraits showing rulers with thoughtful or even fatigued expressions. The coffin texts evolved into the Book of the Dead, although its best-known version is from the New Kingdom, expanding the guide for the deceased in the Duat, the underworld. Once again, central power weakened after the 12th dynasty. Partly due to succession problems and increased immigration to the Nile Delta, this led to the Second Intermediate Period. The most significant event of this era was the arrival and rise of the Hyksos, rulers of foreign lands. A people of Asian Semitic origin who had settled peacefully in the Delta and who, taking advantage of the power vacuum, finally took control of Lower Egypt, establishing their capital in Avaris, 15th dynasty. The Hyksos, although often portrayed in Egyptian history as barbarian invaders, actually adopted many aspects of Egyptian culture and administration. His most lasting contribution was the introduction of new military technologies to Egypt. The horse and the war chariot, which transformed military mobility, the composite bow, more powerful than the simple Egyptian bow, and improvements in metallurgy, including stronger helmets and swords. While the Hyksos ruled the north and controlled vital trade routes, the 17th dynasty maintained precarious sovereignty over Upper Egypt from Thebes, acting as vassals of the Hyksos. This period of tense coexistence was a driving force behind the resurgence of Egyptian nationalism. The struggle for unification and the expulsion of the Hyksos was a gradual process. The Theban pharaohs, such as Seqenenre-Ta'a, started the conflict. His mummy shows fatal wounds that suggest he died in battle. His son, Kamose, continued the war, taking the hostilities all the way to Avaris itself. It was Kamose's brother, Ahmose I, who finally succeeded in expelling the Hyksos from Egypt, pursuing them to southern Canaan and securing the borders. Marking a turning point, Ahmose's victory not only restored independence but also forged a new militaristic spirit in the country, laying the foundation for Egypt's period of greatest power and influence. The New Kingdom. Like, subscribe, and share. The New Kingdom, 18th to 20th dynasties, is the era of empire, a time of warrior pharaohs, international diplomacy, and the construction of colossal temples. Having learned the lesson of the Hyksos invasion, the pharaohs set about creating a vast military empire, expanding Egyptian control into Nubia to the south and the Levant, Syria-Palestine, to the northeast, creating a system of vassal states and garrisons. The 18th dynasty is perhaps the most famous and marks the height of Egypt's wealth and artistic power. Hatshepsut, one of the few female pharaohs, after the death of her husband/half-brother Thutmose II, ruled first as regent for her stepson Thutmose III, and then assumed the full title of pharaoh. Hatshepsut focused on building. Her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is a landmark, and trade. Notably, her expedition to the land of Punt, which brought back frankincense, myrrh, and ebony. Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of Egypt, after the death of Hatshepsut, transformed the state into an imperial superpower. He led 17 successful military campaigns in the Levant, solidifying the empire as far as the Euphrates River. He invented the concept of prestige warfare, bringing the sons of vassal kings to Egypt to be educated at court and ensure their loyalty. Under Amenhotep and Thutmose, wealth flowed to Thebes, where the cult of the god Amun, merged with Ra, Amun-Ra, reached its peak. The magnificent complexes of Karnak and Luxor were built, and pharaohs began to be buried in the Valley of the Kings, in tombs carved out of the rock to protect them from looters, an attempt to avoid the fate of the Old Kingdom pyramids. The moment of greatest internal disruption came with Amenhotep IV, who renamed himself Akhenaten, 18th dynasty. He introduced a radical religious revolution, the Atenism, abolishing the traditional pantheon, especially the worship of Amun, and promoting the exclusive worship of Aten, the solar disk, as the only true god, an early form of monotheism or henotheism. He moved the capital to a new city, Akhetaten, Horizon of Aten, modern Amarna, a planned city built from scratch. The art of the Amarna period was characterized by an unusual and sometimes exaggerated naturalism, showing the royal family, including his wife, the iconic Nefertiti, in intimate scenes and with non-idealized physical features. This period was short but tumultuous, causing great resentment among the priests of Amun. Upon his death, his son, the young Tutankhamun, originally Tutankhaten, restored the old religious order. The discovery of Tutankhamun's almost intact tomb by Howard Carter in 1922 is one of the most important archaeological finds in history, providing an unparalleled window into the opulence of New Kingdom royalty. The 19th dynasty was dominated by the Ramessides, descendants of a general named Ramses. Seti I and Ramses II the Great restored Egyptian military glory, fighting against the Hittites, an emerging power in Anatolia, for control of Syria. The Battle of Kadesh, 1274 before Christ, is the most documented chariot battle in history. Although the result was a stalemate, it culminated in the first known peace treaty between two great powers, the Treaty of Kadesh, a key document of ancient diplomacy. Ramses II reigned for 66 years and is often considered the last great Egyptian pharaoh. He was a prolific builder, responsible for colossal temples such as the Ramesseum and the temples of Abu Simbel, with its 4 giant colossi. It had a lasting impact on the architecture and historical memory of Egypt, assuming an almost mythical figure. The New Kingdom ended with the 20th dynasty, whose pharaohs often bore the name Ramses, Ramses III to Ramses XI. The pressure from the Sea Peoples, a group of unknown invaders who ravaged the eastern Mediterranean and destroyed the Mycenaean civilization and the Hittite Empire, was a constant threat. Ramses III managed to repel them in a series of naval and land battles, but at the cost of permanently weakening the state's treasury and military strength. Internal instability, including workers' strikes, the famous Deir el-Medina strike, and tomb looting, recorded in the tomb papyri, marked the decline. By the end of the 20th dynasty, power had been divided again. A nominal pharaoh in the north and the high priest of Amun in Thebes controlling the south, leading into the Third Intermediate Period. The Third Intermediate Period, 21st to 25th dynasties, was characterized by persistent fragmentation. The country was divided into spheres of influence in the north, where the pharaohs of the 21st dynasty, with their capital in Tanis, ruled, and the south, controlled by the high priest of Amun. There were several dynasties of Libyan origin that managed to rule, but the most notable was the unification by the 25th dynasty. The Black Pharaohs of Kush, Nubia. Originally from the Kingdom of Kush, present-day Sudan, south of Egypt, the Kushites considered Egypt to be the cradle of their culture, and their goal was to restore Ma'at and the glories of the New Kingdom. Pharaohs like Pi and Taharka ruled Egypt and Nubia as a vast empire, reviving the art of the Old and Middle Kingdoms. However, their dominance was a source of conflict with the growing Assyrian Empire. The late period, 26th to 31st dynasties, was a cycle of attempts to restore national power, followed by foreign invasions. The Site period, 26th dynasty, with Assyrian aid in expelling the Kushites, achieved a brief revival of Old Kingdom culture, a period of renaissance artistic and administrative, which brought temporary stability. However, foreign domination was inevitable. The Assyrians invaded in 671 before Christ, and their influence was eventually replaced by that of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The final fate of Egyptian independence was sealed with the Persian conquest in 525 before Christ under Cambyses II, 27th dynasty, turning Egypt into a satrapy province of the vast Achaemenid Empire. Although Egypt briefly regained its independence under some native dynasties, 28th to 30th dynasties, its power had faded. Pharaoh Nectanebo II was the last native pharaoh of Egypt, fleeing before the Second Persian conquest in 343 before Christ. The course of Egyptian history changed irrevocably with the arrival of Alexander the Great in 332 before Christ. Welcomed as a liberator from Persian domination, Alexander founded the city of Alexandria, whose strategic location and urban plan quickly made it the intellectual and commercial beacon of the Hellenistic world. Upon Alexander's death, his empire was divided among his generals, and Egypt was taken over by Ptolemy I Soter, beginning the Ptolemaic dynasty, the Lagids. The Ptolemies, although Greek in culture and language, presented themselves to the Egyptian population as the legitimate successors of the pharaohs, adopting rituals, building temples to the Egyptian gods, and maintaining the religious structure and bureaucracy. Alexandria flourished with its famous Library of Alexandria, the greatest center of knowledge in the ancient world, and the lighthouse of Alexandria, Pharaohs, one of the 7 wonders of the world, which symbolized maritime power and innovation. Culturally, the dynasty fused Greek and Egyptian elements, giving rise to the gods Serapis and a syncretic art. However, Ptolemaic power slowly declined. Dynastic conflicts, characterized by intrigues and assassinations among brothers and relatives, poor economic management, and the growing influence of Rome wore down the kingdom, leaving it increasingly dependent on Roman protection. The last and most famous ruler of the dynasty was Cleopatra VII, from 69 to 30 before Christ. A brilliant, cultured, and charismatic figure, the only known Ptolemy to speak Egyptian, he attempted to restore Egyptian power through strategic alliances with the most powerful Roman leaders, first Julius Caesar, with whom he had a son, Caesarion, and then Mark Antony. His vision was of an Eastern Hellenistic empire that could counterbalance the power of Rome. His final defeat to Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, at the crucial Battle of Actium in 31 before Christ, and his subsequent suicide in 30 before Christ, marked the definitive end of pharaonic independence. Egypt was annexed as a personal province of the Roman Emperor, and its history as an independent civilization came to an end. Under Roman rule, Egypt became the breadbasket of the empire, especially vital for feeding Rome's population. The Romans exploited the Nile's agricultural resources efficiently. Although Roman emperors had themselves portrayed as pharaohs in Egyptian temples, the Egyptian population was subjected to a strict Roman administration headed by an equestrian prefect. Egyptian religious life persisted, with temples like the one dedicated to Isis at Philae continuing to thrive. However, the arrival and growth of Christianity in Alexandria, a key center for early Christian theology, in the 1st to 4th centuries after Christ marked the beginning of the end for the ancient pharaonic religion. Imperial decrees, especially under Theodosius I, which prohibited pagan worship, led to the closure of the last temples. The last known hieroglyphic text dates from 394 after Christ in Philae, and the last demotic text, a later cursive script, was lost soon after. The ability to read hieroglyphs faded, and the secrets of ancient Egypt remained sealed until the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799. Egyptian society was rigidly hierarchical and theocratic, structured in a social pyramid. At the top was the pharaoh, the divine monarch, mediator between gods and men, responsible for maintaining Ma'at. Below them were the vizier and the high bureaucracy. The vizier was the head of the administration, essentially the prime minister in charge of justice, the treasury, and the management of the Nile. Next in line were the priests, who wielded considerable power, especially those of the Temple of Amun in Thebes during the New Kingdom, responsible for the temple's vast assets and the administration of divine worship. The scribes formed the most crucial class for the administration, since knowing how to read and write hieroglyphs and hieratic guaranteed a privileged position, and was the gateway to the bureaucracy. The artisans and merchants worked for the pharaoh, temples, or private individuals, including builders, jewelers, potters, and carpenters. The vast majority of the population consisted of peasants, farmers, who, although not slaves in the modern sense, were obligated to perform corvée labor for the pharaoh on irrigation or construction projects. Egyptian religion was polytheistic and focused on ensuring eternal life. The main gods, such as Ra, sun; Osiris, death and resurrection; Isis, magic and motherhood; Horus, kingdom and protection; and Amun, local god of Thebes who became the main god, formed a dynamic pantheon. The concept of life after death was complex, involving several parts of the soul: the Ka, the life force or spiritual double; the Ba, the personality of the deceased, who could travel between the underworld and the world of the living; and the Akh, the transfigured and glorified form of the spirit who joined the gods. Mummification, a process that lasted 70 days, was essential to preserving the body, allowing the Ka and the Ba to reunite with the body and the person achieve immortality. The final judgment, presided over by Osiris, was the key moment where the heart of the deceased, the seat of consciousness, was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the truth. If the heart was lighter, the deceased passed into eternal life. If it was heavier, he was devoured by the demon Ammit. While the pyramids are iconic, Egyptian architecture was characterized by its colossal temples, built with astonishing precision to house the gods and perform rituals. The temples of Karnak and Luxor, with their massive hypostyle halls and obelisks, are examples of monumental religious architecture. Egyptian art was governed by strict conventions: frontality, the use of a hierarchy of sizes, the pharaoh was always larger than the others; and perspective, where the body was drawn in profile but the eye and shoulders were shown from the front. This rigid style, intended to ensure permanence and magical clarity, was only temporarily subverted during the Amarna period. The Egyptians made significant contributions in several fields. In medicine, they knew the circulatory system, performed complex surgeries, and had detailed knowledge of anatomy, thanks to mummification. The Ebers and Edwin Smith medical papyri are testaments to his knowledge. In mathematics, they developed a decimal system and had an advanced knowledge of geometry, necessary for the construction of pyramids and irrigation. They knew the approximate formula for calculating the area of a circle and the volume of a truncated pyramid. Finally, regarding the calendar, they created a solar one of 365 days. Divided into 12 months of 30 days, plus 5 additional days, epigomenal, essentially the same calendar used today, which was much more accurate than the lunar calendar that prevailed elsewhere. The legacy of ancient Egypt is immense. Its impact on later civilizations is visible in architecture, religion, and mathematics. His advances in medicine, the development of a 365-day solar calendar, and his complex theology influenced the Greeks and Romans, and through them, Western civilization. Like, subscribe, and share. Until next time.